This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That is our sports betting podcast here on the FanDuel Podcast Network, getting set for week number 2 of college football. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire.com, joined here, as always, by Dr. Ed Feng of thepowerrank.com. You can find him on Twitter at thepowerrank. And Ed, I come to you in defeat because Stanford defeated Northwestern in the most depressing fashion I've ever seen. I can't say that. I've seen a lot of bad Northwestern football games, but you are the winner of our bet.
Well, anytime you lose a bet because the opposing team took a fumble and ran it back for a touchdown, that's a bad beat. It's definitely a bad beat. So, I think we had both kind of converged on the fact that this was a good 50-50 bet with the points at 6.5. I think that's exactly what it turned out to be. Stanford, did do better in the yardage department. So, there's many other ways that they could have covered it as well. But, I think our analysis of the game was right, and it was a good game to bet on, and hopefully we'll do another one. I'll take Lions side at some point.
Okay, perfect.
What's your NFL team?
I grew up in Minnesota, but I also grew up a Jets fan. So, I don't know if I have an NFL alliance. My alliance is to Trevor Siemian, I guess, and he's a Jets backup. So in 3 years, when the Jets and Lions play next time, if Siemian is somehow on the roster, I'll hit you then. But with Stanford and Northwestern, initially I was very sad because I was like, oh, cool. NU's going to lose this game, but they'll cover. And I won't have to wear a Stanford shirt on air, which I will next week once my Stanford shirt arrives. And I was like, I had accepted that. The problem was I accepted that before the end of the game. But realistically, when I was accepting the fact that they were going to cover, I also knew that I was lucky in the fact that they were covering. Because if KJ Costello doesn't get hurt, they're not going to cover. If there isn't a bunch of weirdness in that game, if they're, maybe if they get the targeting call against Costello when he goes down, maybe that swings things. There were so many reasons Northwestern should not have been covering to begin with, that I eventually came around and decided it wasn't as bad of a beat as it initially felt, but that didn't really console me all that much. I think I agree with you where seeing Stanford so heavily outgain Northwestern made it feel like it shouldn't have been a bad beat, but at the time, that doesn't really get rid of the sour taste right away. Yeah,
and kind of thinking long term, you got to ask some questions about Hunter Johnson.
I was asking questions about Hunter Johnson. His first swing pass, I said bad things. It got real graphic real fast. I'm sure that he will improve. I hope he does. I'm sure he's a great guy.
Well,
but that did not lead to a lot of optimism, I'll say that.
Well, he has to improve, right? Because isn't Green out?
Yeah, TJ Green, I think he had foot surgery. So
he had surgery? Okay.
Yeah. And it's weird because we were talking last week about this game and I was so pessimistic about it because seeing TJ Green as the co-starter with Johnson, I was like, oh man, that says a really bad thing about Hunter Johnson. Right. But it was mostly because I was down on TJ Green, but he actually looked pretty good. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It's going to be rough. I think they're off this week, so I'll get a week to lick my wounds. I move forward from there. Hopefully Costello's healthy for Stanford facing a USC team that is not healthy. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But, a tough beat, but I was lucky to begin with, so I can't cry too much about that one for sure. Coming up today, we're going to get set for week number 2 of college football. Drew Martin. You can find him on Twitter at DrewMartinBets. You can find his work over at SportsMemo.com and also over at Sportsbook Review, which you can follow on Twitter at SBR Sports Picks. Find Drew's stuff there. We are talking week 2 college football. Drew specializes in betting smaller conference games. So we're going to talk Western Kentucky against FIU because Drew thinks the line there is pretty inefficient. Of course, we'll get to the bigger games, LSU, Texas A&M, Clemson, to get his thoughts on those and see what he thinks there. But it should be a pretty fun episode. And Ed, as someone who does not know as much as he should about smaller conferences, I'm excited to hear Drew's thoughts on specifically that Western Kentucky game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way he goes about it in terms of his process is also really interesting. So he's going to be a great guest.
Coming up on Friday, we'll have our Week 1 NFL preview. We are going to talk with Donnie Rightside for that one, and it should be up sometime around noon. We're going to record at 10 a.m. Eastern on Friday, So should be up around noon or so, I would guess. And if you want to make sure you get that podcast right as it is posted, make sure you subscribe to Covering the Spread on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, the Google Play Store, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find Covering the Spread. And of course, as always, ratings and reviews so greatly appreciated on those as well. We'll get to Drew in just 1 second, but first, let's go back through week 1 of college football and figure out where we may need to tinker our process a little bit in covering the past.
Covering the past.
All right, so last week on Covering the Spread, previewing week 1 of college football, we talked essentially about 4 games. We had Edward Egros on. Edward, pretty good in his first, full episode of Covering the Spread. He had Utah covering against BYU. That happened. Talked about Auburn covering against Oregon. That happened, as we'll talk about with Drew later on as well, because he is an Auburn alum. And then Houston did cover against Oklahoma. It may have been a backdoor cover, but a cover's a cover. Good teams win, great teams cover, and I am now convinced that Houston is a great team. And you talked about Cincinnati against UCLA, and that was a really weird game. So overall, what were your thoughts on those 4 games we talked about, specifically UCLA, Cincinnati?
Yeah, Edward did a great job. My result wasn't as good as Cincinnati ended up winning that game. Dorian Thompson-Robinson was terrible, and this really gets into kind of the hardest part about sports betting, in that you watch that game and he played bad. And I personally think it was on the worst side of his games in terms of accuracy. I think it was more accurate last year. And obviously the fumbles too affected the game.
Right.
But let's not make excuses for it in terms of the turnovers. Like, he was just bad. He was not accurate. He could not get the ball where he wanted to throw it. And kind of intellectually, you want to say small sample size, just the 1 game.
Right.
But then you watch the game, and it was just that bad. And there's always this mix between the numbers, which are probably going to find value on UCLA this week against San Diego State, and then, what you actually saw. Because he could be bad, right?
Right.
I don't know how many more games like that he's going to survive under this system. Because when you go 3-9 your first year. So anyways, I always feel like, it's a perfect example of, the game didn't go your way, that's fine. What does it mean going forward? And that's really hard because if you watch the game, you really don't want to fire again on UCLA, despite, your preseason analysis. And the defense wasn't good either, right? We kind of make your assumptions when you get that many players back that they're going to be better. They really weren't. So, was it just all around a bad game? Yeah, it was definitely overall a bad game. Can they get better? Not really sure.
Right.
We did have the game at UCLA +3. It did close at 2.5 most places.
Right.
So, a little bit of closing line value there. That means something to me. It doesn't mean everything to me like it does to some sports bettors. But UCLA is probably a team I'm staying away from.
So let me talk to you more about the film process here, because, we all watch games, but we're also numbers people at heart. And there's going to be a bias towards what your eyes see every time. Yeah. How do you personally, within your process, combat the bias? Because there is value to be gained from watching the games, obviously, too. But how do you kind of try to balance that within your personal process?
It's really hard because when you watch, you inevitably want to put more meaning to what you just saw. Mm-hmm. And I think it's different from the NFL, because I'm sure at some point this season, I'm going to be on a team that just played awful the last week, 2, 3 weeks. And I think it's a little bit different in the NFL because those guys are all pros. And, even a guy like Eli Manning can stay in the NFL. And there might be a week where you want to bet on Eli Manning. As much as that makes you want to throw up, it's going to happen. I think it's a little bit different with college. These are 19-year-olds. I just don't know about Dorian Thompson-Robinson. It's a tough thing. And I think everyone's going to have their own approach to it. I think you have to always watch your biases because you're always kind of going to be biased to what you see. And, there's no right answer.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I struggle with most in assessing my own process is how much do I value what I see versus what the numbers say. and I don't think I'll ever get it perfect. So it's something that I love talking to people like you about to find out what your process is, because it's never very easy. We'll get to Drew in just 1 second to talk about week 2, but first, if you want to get in on the action, check out the FanDuel Sportsbook and place your first bet today. If you lose, FanDuel will give you a refund of up to $500 in site credit. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com for more details. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 plus and physically present in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's bring on Drew Martin. You can find him on Twitter at DrewMartinBets. And once again, his work is over at sportsmemo.com and at the Sportsbook Review, talking week 2 of college football.
Covering the present.
Let's welcome Drew Martin into Covering the Spread to talk week 2 of college football. Drew, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jim, I'm doing good, man. It's week 2 of college football, so we got some over and under adjustments to do, but overall, it's a great time to be a sports bettor. Early college football season, I think, brings the most advantages towards the sports bettor over the odds makers. So exciting time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just moved too. So you've got that going for you. You've got college football back. We've got NFL coming up this week for week 1 as well. So busy time. And I want to thank you for taking time out of that schedule to join us here for today. And I want to talk to you, Drew, first about your background, because your background's in finance, and there's clearly going to be a pretty heavy overlap between finance and betting, especially, when it comes to trying to find edges in markets. But what do you believe is the biggest leg up that you get in betting due to your knowledge of finance?
Jim, that's a good question. And, I guess I would start with just kind of the Blimp's view of money management. And, I've never been a guy to kind of go all in on a bet or anything like that. I don't recommend that for anybody out there new to the industry with all the, legalized sports betting. People maybe listening for the first time or just new to sports betting overall. I would probably say just kind of limiting the wagers, 1% of your bankroll. If you got $100,000, don't be betting, $5,000 or $10,000 on any one, bet that you think is a lock or anything like that, because anything can happen in sports betting. And just kind of a long-term approach of maybe 1-2% of your bankroll towards the plays that you think have the most advantages. Also stick to what you know, Jim. In investing in finance, if you're concentrating mostly on stocks, stick to stocks. If you're concentrating mostly on bonds, stick to bonds. Don't kind of go out there too much into markets that you're not really comfortable with, that you don't really know, because that's where you can kind of get suckered into making bad investments. So if you're a college football guy, that's what you know the most. I would say, go in full board on college football. Same thing with college basketball. Don't try to do too much. Sports betting is a market where it's a lot better to know a lot about a little bit than to know a little bit about a lot. And that's probably the thing that I bring in the most about coming from the investment world into sports betting.
So let's stick with that same thread there, Drew, because you were talking about knowing your strengths and kind of that self-awareness. When you look at yourself as a bettor, what would you deem to be your strength, and where do you try to focus most of your attention when it comes to college football?
I would say my strengths are college football and college basketball in overall thinking that there's just more teams and more games for the odds makers to spend their time doing. Therefore, there's more of a chance for them to make a mistake. In college basketball, we have over 300 teams. That's very hard for the odds makers to have a correct read on all of them. Same thing in college football. There's 130 plus college football Division I teams all getting lined. We got sportsbooks now with sports betting becoming more legalized, more mainstream, more people jumping into the market looking for different marketing avenues. We just saw just this last week a new change in the market. Circus Sports in Las Vegas opened the market in terms of sides on Sunday afternoon. They beat the offshores. Mostly it's bet online in years past, bringing the first odds to the market. Therefore, it's just more mistakes can happen. So talking about, and to add on to that, smaller conferences where there's less eyeballs. I think that, it's more important for the odds makers to have a sharp line on Texas versus LSU than it is for them to have a sharp line on FIU versus Western Kentucky week 2. They just didn't spend a lot of time on it. They're not going to have the same amount of money bet. Therefore, their risk isn't going to be as high. And using all of those things towards our advantage. So I've tried to concentrate more so on the Sun Belt, Conference USA, Mountain West, conferences like that, the group of 5. And in the last couple of years, it's kind of paid off.
Excellent. So, Drew, how do you approach college football betting? What do you do on a week-to-week basis in terms of previewing these teams?
Well, I try to get as much information. Information is power, Ed. As you know, I try to take information from really smart people in the industry like yourself, Ed Feng, like Bill Connolly, guys like that really know the sport. Good writers bring up good ideas to get information on each team. Also, I take, part of my background is I grew up playing the sport, played quarterback position, was kind of a film junkie, so to speak. So watching these games, taking notes, watching the replay of games, watching for injuries where the backup may be a far drop off from the kid that was starting. Keep in mind, this isn't the NFL where a backup comes in and it's still, a top level athlete making, millions of dollars as the backup. A lot of times in these smaller conferences, it's the kid that just got the last scholarship this past year, and he's really up against the guy that's going to work him. And if you can kind of find those matchups, it can really go a long way into getting an advantage over the odds makers, because again, they got a lot to do just from Saturday to the opening number on Sunday, and that speaks to the opening number not being nearly as sharp as the closing number. So it's also important to get down on bets, especially early in the season in college football, earlier in the week, because it's not as sharp as a number, in my opinion.
Yeah, Drew, one of the things you were talking about there was trying to watch the games and try to learn what you can from that. One game I'm sure you watched last week, given that you are an Auburn alum, probably Auburn against Oregon. They're playing Tulane this week. What'd you think from Auburn in that opener? Obviously an exciting win there at the end. What are your thoughts on Auburn based on that? And what do you think about Bo Nix after his first game?
Yeah, I mean, for college football fans, I think it was a great game to watch. It was very exciting down the end. In terms of, just kind of focusing in on the Oregon side, I think that they kind of got hosed a little bit. They did have the better quarterback. Talent-wise, a lot of people want to focus on the fact of the SEC having the better players and kind of dominating out of conference. I don't necessarily see it that way, and mainstream media is kind of focused on that, just kind of handicapping conferences. I'm not a big fan of that. I think you got to look a little bit deeper, especially in the betting markets, a little bit more under the hood, so to speak. I mean, Oregon, I think, went straight up against Auburn, and it showed in the scoreboard. I think that they had the more experienced, better, more talented quarterback at this point in their careers. And I also, you got to tip your cap towards that Oregon defense. I think that they were great all game long up until the end with that touchdown pass. I would give the edge to the Oregon defensive backs over the Auburn wide receivers, 10 out of 10 times. I think they were dominating them. And I view it as Auburn on the outside skill position talent. I don't think they're all that great at the wide receiver position outside of number 18. I think they're going to be up against it, and I think they can have trouble playing an SEC West schedule that's one of the toughest, if not the toughest in the country. Overall, betting Auburn, I look at it as maybe as an under team going forward. We've seen it in the past with Gus Malzahn. He doesn't necessarily press on that gas pedal to go up tempo if the offense isn't really churning, and it really wasn't churning for a lot of that game. So going forward with Auburn's defense and the sentiment that Malzahn has calling the plays, knowing that he has a great defense and not going up tempo, I would look for Auburn as more of an under team going forward, Jim.
All right. I think that's definitely interesting and definitely good to hear that perspective as someone who watches, these games pretty in depth and knows a lot about Auburn. So interesting to see what they do going forward. Let's dive into the game by game breakdown here, and we will get into some non-Power 5 teams later on. We got to pick Drew's brain on his specialty here coming up. Again, follow him on Twitter at DrewMartinBets. Let's start things off here with LSU against Texas, one of the big games this week. LSU now a 5.5-point favorite in this game. The total is 55.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook, and this is a line that has moved quite a bit. It was originally much closer, and the markets expected a much closer game, but things have shifted heavily towards LSU. So, Drew, when you look at these two teams, do you think the line has moved too much towards LSU, or do you still think there is value in betting them at -5.5?
Well, I guess I think the movement has gotten a little out of line, Jim. Texas coming into this game, a lot of what the analytics guys not really impressed with Texas's win. However, when you break it down even more, Louisiana Tech up front, their defensive line, their linebackers, they're just some big boys. In terms of group of 5 defenses, I have them ranked as one of the best and better than a lot of Power 5 opponents. So putting up 45 points against that Louisiana Tech Bulldog defense, I actually don't think it was that bad. I think it was very impressive, actually. So I kind of give a tick up here towards Texas, and with Sam Ellinger at the quarterback position, I think that, his ceiling is very high. He's a guy that can be playing on Sundays. Ingram at running back, I think he shows a lot of versatility, can make plays as well. They do have a couple injuries. I think that is pushing this line a little bit towards LSU, but overall, viewing this game, Todd Herman as an underdog, especially at home, has been great. He's in year 3 of the administration. I usually have that as a circle on bet on opportunity for Texas. Plus the fact, and this is something that Ed and our friend Bill Connolly put me on in a conference just last year, the IFBC and in Las Vegas, a lot of fun, by the way, is defensive backs, the continuity there. It carries over more from year to year, and that matters more at that position. And as we know, Texas is kind of going with this slogan this year as DBU. And so to have that confidence, to have the same guys returning and the continuity there, I think that it will translate into them playing better against the pass anyway. So getting up near a touchdown now, I would actually lean towards Texas here, but it looks like the betting market's like in that SEC sentiment with the SEC athletes here and betting on LSU. So I kind of disagree with that line move, Jim.
Do you disagree with enough with the line move to actually bet LSU at -5.5, or to bet Texas at +5.5, or is it just enough for you to stay away from LSU?
Well, at 5.5, I'm staying away. I mean, it's actually up to 6.5 now at some books. So we're inching closer to that 7 number, and this is another part of sports betting. Getting close to these key numbers here and watching the market movement, I would actually not bet it at this point. But seeing where this market is moving, also knowing in the back of our heads that, the more mainstream bettors here, and as more of those mainstream bettors enter the marketplace, I think that public money is going to start pushing some of these marquee college football games even more this year than we've seen in years past. So I think there's actually a chance that this could touch 7, who knows, maybe even 7.5, talking about, a marquee Saturday night game where a lot of people are going to be wanting to bet this, get tickets on it. So I would actually wait here. And if we see a 7, even higher, that might bring opportunity to Texas. But to answer your question, no, I haven't personally bet this game.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of envisioned the Texas oil money coming in late, and they got a lot of high hopes for the Longhorns. So we'll see about that.
Interesting, Ed. I like that. In terms of the Texas oil money, I don't know if we'll see more of it this year. Is sports betting legal in Texas? I'm not fully up to date on which states are legal and aren't.
I don't think so, but they're going to have their outs wherever and things like that.
That's a great point.
So we'll see. I mean, I'm really interested to see where this game goes. It should be a great one. Drew, let's switch a little bit gears. Talk about Texas A&M going to Clemson. Clemson's a 17.5 point favorite right now with a total at 64.5. What did you think about Clemson? I don't know if you had a chance to watch Clemson last week, but Trevor Lawrence struggled a little bit, threw a couple picks. What do you think about this game?
Yeah, I did watch the game, and going against Georgia Tech, I was a big fan of Paul Johnson watching that triple option. So to see him change it kind of ripped my heart out a little bit. I like watching those triple option teams at the Power 5 level, but they're in for a long rebuild, as you guys know. Going from the triple option to more of a modern spread is going to be tough, but I think that they'll be able to recruit there in Atlanta. But talking about that game and going forward for Clemson. Trevor Lawrence is a guy, obviously, I think that he's a future first round draft pick. That's not, really going outside of the mainstream thinking here. And I wouldn't put too much into a couple interceptions week 1 against Georgia Tech. I think that he's a great quarterback. Having said that, betting this game, Texas A&M versus Clemson, this is a big number you're going to lay to an SEC West athletic defense, offense, all that said. But even more importantly, not just to talk about conference affiliation, we got Kellen Mond, the quarterback for Texas A&M. He's a dual threat guy, can throw the ball down the field. And just last year, and that brings last year with Clemson, their defensive line, 3 defensive line first-round draft picks off the team. And granted, Clemson is one of these teams that reloads, not necessarily rebuilds. So I think it's going to be tough for them because it was their closest matchup all last year. I think they'd won just 28-26 as 12-point favorites. So Texas A&M covered that number, not only covered it by 10 points, almost beat them. And going into this year, this is a Texas A&M team that returns 5 starters on the offensive line that started at least 7 games last year in front of a very good quarterback in Kellen Mond that can throw the ball downfield, and including 3 pretty good wide receivers, guys that got next level athletic ability, in my opinion. So I would look towards Texas A&M here, actually catching 17.5 points. I think they have a puncher's chance at going into Death Valley, South Carolina, coming out with a victory. And keep in mind, Dabo Swinney's been a great coach, but it's tough to motivate 18 to 23-year-old kids all off season long, going through all those workouts. They're reading the press clippings. They're the best. They're the national champions, going on campus, like you guys know, and just being told they're the best all off season long. I would put that all in our pocket. I've bet Texas A&M plus the 17.5, actually caught them at an 18, and I recommend it out there. And as we get closer to game time, I would sprinkle a little bit on the money line, Texas A&M Aggies.
And Drew has them at Texas A&M plus 18. They're now plus 17.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. But even at that number, 70% of the bets and 71% of the money are on Texas A&M. So sounds like the public is with you there, Drew. Good feeling to have as you get that one. Let's finish up here with a game you sound pretty excited about. You brought it up earlier. That's Western Kentucky against Florida International. Florida International, FIU, is favored by 7.5 here, and the total in this game is 60. Both these teams coming off season opening losses. FIU lost to Tulane. Western Kentucky lost to Central Arkansas. What draws you to this game, Drew, and do you think that there is an inefficient line on this game?
I do. And talking about betting college football, week 2 to about week 8 or 9, I think is the prime area to get an advantage for sports bettors. And if you know the teams inside and out and you spend a lot of time, trust your numbers and trust your judgment, because again, they have to spread their time and their knowledge over all 130 teams. We can focus in on just one matchup here. So Conference USA, watch both of these two teams in terms of their game film, also studying them a lot in the offseason. We got Western Kentucky here losing to an FCS opponent week 1, not looking very good. We've seen the trajectory of this program heading down. They haven't been recruiting all that well. Going up against FIU, who faced Tulane, and Willie Fritz's Tulane had Justin McMillan at the quarterback position. And as you guys know, when you're a defense facing a option principle offense and you don't stop them in the first quarter, it's not something that's very easy to change in the second, third, and fourth quarter. So it kind of snowballs on you. And that happened to FIU in week 1. So that score looks a lot more misleading, a lot worse on the Panthers than I believe it actually was. This is an FIU team under Butch Davis. And I know the Miami Hurricanes won the national championship in 2001 as Larry Coker as the head coach. Butch Davis actually recruited all of those guys. He was there that built that program in terms of the U. You can make the argument the best college football team of all time. So whatever he's doing down there, recruiting in South Florida, it's working. The FIU Panthers have 47 three-star recruits from Broward, Dade, and Palm Beach County down there in South Florida. They got the quarterback transfer from Bowling Green and Morgan, and he's an accurate quarterback that I think can lead these kids. He's a veteran quarterback. So this 7.5 number here, I know the market's even coming in on Western Kentucky, but I've learned over time, Jim, that I've spent enough time. It's not rocket science that when the market goes against you in a situation like this, I'm happy to go against the market all day long. It's worked for positive EV betting for me in the past. And just really all of those sentiments going up against each other. I like FIU, the Panthers at home to roll Western Kentucky. I laid the 8. I laid the 7.5. It keeps going against me. I'm going to keep adding to it. So I would recommend to you, Ed, the listeners out there, that FIU Panthers are the side.
So Drew, let me talk to you about that actually. When you get a read that the public and the market will be on one side, but you're on the other, do you try to wait before entering that market, or do you not want to risk it that number will no longer be available? The number you see as being advantageous. How do you decide when to enter a market when you know it may go against you?
Man, that's next level question. Good one there, Jim. And to tell you the truth, going into this on the openers, I didn't know the market would go against me. I made my number, the market came out against it, and, I fired away. But having seen that, that's a great question. And I would come to, there's other, metrics bettors out there, the syndicates that go off of, and I've talked to some guys in the industry in terms of FBS teams losing to FCS teams in week 1, coming back week 2, and performing well against the spread. So in terms of a glimpse view of this actual matchup, I actually think that's what's happening in the marketplace, and they just have a lot more money than I do as a sports bettor. That's what's pushing the market against me. So I'm actually viewing this in terms of a more strategic, a more kind of knowledge base of this singled out matchup. And FIU just has more talent. Granted, I could be wrong. It's one sports bet. You don't want to go too much away from this. Fumbles, anything like that can happen. Also, I could have the wrong read. I don't believe it, though, and I'm betting it personally. So that's why I think the market is going against me. And in terms of market entry, I don't know how far it will go against me. So just with each half-point move, Jim, I add to the bet. Up to a certain point, I do have limits.
For sure. Drew, is there anything in the tape that you're watching that makes you like this game?
Sure. The offensive and defensive line push. Again, going against Tulane, I think Tulane is a very underrated team. So I think that makes FIU look a lot worse than they actually do. Just after 1 week. And again, watching the tape, like I talked about in terms of the offensive profile of Tulane, running those option principles, and it kind of snowballing on FIU defense. That's the main reason. But also watching, the Western Kentucky tape, and just coaching in last year, really going from a bowl team to a 3-9 team, and just the program overall. Didn't like what I saw. They lost at home to an FCS team. Now they're going on the road to South Florida. Going to be humid down there. So I just think a lot of different avenues are pointing towards FIU being the side, Ed.
So, Drew, right now we are monitoring the LSU-Texas line to see if that goes further towards LSU. We've got Texas A&M. You got them plus 18 there now, plus 17.5. And then we do like FIU. Any other bets you see on the board, whether it be at, one of these smaller conference schools that you like, or maybe that you have grabbed already this week?
Sure. I don't know how much time we can go, so I'll just rapid fire, and you guys can stop me when you want. UCF is a team that, I've been on for a couple years now, one of the more profitable teams in college football. And granted, at some point this is going to end. And talking about what I brought from finance to sports betting, the whole buy low, sell high. philosophy. I think that works in sports betting as well. So UCF before was kind of a buy low candidate. Now I'm not so sure you're buying low. However, they are only -10 here on the road at FAU. In terms of athletic ability, it's going to very much favor UCF. Their recruiting rankings are better than heck a lot of Power 5 teams. So this UCF program is a powerhouse, really. Laying 10 to FAU in Boca Raton, Jim. Just from kind of knowing the college football in Florida, UCF's likely going to outnumber FAU in their own stadium there in Boca Raton. It's just a tough read in terms of the quarterback switch for UCF. You know, Mackenzie Milton, I think you could make the argument he was the most valuable player to his team last year. And seeing a new quarterback position, I really wanted to watch them week one and learn a little bit more about them. Unfortunately, they played Florida A&M, the Rattlers, so it's tough to get too good of a read on them. But they did put up north of 50, I think north of 60 points. So it kind of is a bet on opportunity. I did go small on UCF here, laying the 9.5, or actually it's pushed up to 10 now. Also BYU, Tennessee.
Sure. Can I stop you real quick?
Yeah.
Because I want to point out, you came on my podcast 2 years ago talking about UCF, and you were obviously very spot on the money there for, they've lost once in the last 2 years. I do want to ask you a little bit more about UCF, because this is a team that I'm not particularly sure about. I wanted to ask you about on offense. They've thrown the ball so well over the past 2 years. Like, can Brandon Wimbush continue that against good competition?
That's the question, Ed, and that's why I'm not going all in or anything like that. I'm just kind of going down the rotation numbers on things that I bet personally, and talking about talent 1 through 84 on the roster. It very much favors UCF here, but you're right, accuracy numbers and especially from the quarterback position, throwing downfield are very important in things that I use in my betting. So I think that still is a question. But also add in the fact that the freshman that UCF has, he's a lot more accurate. So he got snaps in that first game. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a bunch of snaps here. And we've seen it before with the profile that UCF has in terms of just being able to light it up. So yeah, to answer your question, it is something that I do worry about, and one of the reasons I haven't gotten too big on the Knights, Ed.
Okay. And also, let me just throw in the defense is really interesting to me too. A lot of talent returning on that side of the ball, but a unit that, I want to say they ranked 84th in my adjusted yards per play last year. It was a unit that forced a lot of turnovers, so they looked a lot better on the scoreboard. What do you make of their defense?
I think that there's an improvement. I think that the talent's there, when you look at their recruiting rankings. So I think that there can be improvement, but it's another thing to watch. And sure, I could see FAU putting up some points, and that speaks towards this over as well. It's in the upper 60s right now. If we have good weather, another thing in sports betting, especially in South Florida, you got to watch that weather up until kickoff, really, because it can change. But I think that that's a question mark as well, Ed. So but I will say this, following their beat writers, they do work on turnovers on the defensive side, and it's spoken to that. And I've tried to work that into my handicapping as well, something that I think you would be on in terms of teams that have created a lot of turnovers in the past, it reflecting into the future that they keep they keep kind of the over of average on creating turnovers. I've tried to work that into my metrics, haven't necessarily been able to put pen to paper on it, but it's something that I kind of just keep in the back of my mind. So I would actually be interested in your thoughts. Have you ever done any research on that?
I have, and we should talk offline about it more. I think it's a fascinating thing. It's like a kind of a chicken and egg problem, because we're finding out that the best teams tend to have great turnover margins, right? Alabama hasn't had a negative. They've had like one negative turnover margin since Nick Saban's been there or something like that. But it ends up that a lot of that happens because they're up in games and they have a good defense and the opponent's trying to throw the ball. So in general, like, fumbles tend to be pretty even, whether you're a good team or a terrible team, but interceptions can greatly skew towards better teams just because they tend to be up a lot late in games. We'll talk about that. It's something I'm planning on digging into over the next kind of 365 days. Definitely a project.
Before we let you go, Drew, you were starting talking about BYU Tennessee, and given what happened to those two teams last week, I want to hear your thoughts on that game. So, final closing thoughts here: BYU Tennessee. What's your thoughts on that game?
Oh, man, you're going to close me off on just one more game, Jim. No, I'm
Right.
just joking with you, man. In terms of BYU Tennessee, I think that, the BYU quarterback, Zach Wilson, just a freshman, and he's going to be going into Neyland Stadium. I think it's a really tough ask for him. I think that he struggled throwing the ball down the field. That's not to speak towards, his future career being very good, but just in 1 week being able to turn that around. Granted, there's the other side to it, saying he was going up against Utah's defensive line, and there is something to that, but I don't think Tennessee's defensive line is necessarily bad, or their defense is bad. I think it speaks towards similar to the FIU versus Tulane in week 1. The Georgia State Panthers, in my opinion, very, very underrated. Just a 2-10 team last year, and their quarterback Dan Ellington, a very good athlete. In high school, he was very good. Playing there in Atlanta, I think that Georgia State, when you read their articles coming into the season, that they were a very much improved team in the Sun Belt. So even though, granted, if they played Tennessee 10 times, they're not going to win 5, anything like that. I don't think that game was nearly as surprising. And looking back and grading myself as a handicapper, I actually wish I would have bet it. I just, got away from it. And, Georgia State is going to be a bet on for me going forward, Jim. And I think Tennessee kind of, talk about that buy low opportunity here at home against a BYU team that I think is going to be up against it. Also, Garetano at the quarterback position, I rate him a whole lot higher than I do BYU's freshman quarterback making his first road start. So I think Tennessee at just 3.5 right now is worth a bet on the buy low, sell high methodology.
That is awesome stuff. That is Drew Martin. You can find him on Twitter at DrewMartinBets, and his work is over at SportsMemo.com and also at Sportsbook Review. Drew, thank you so much for swinging by here. A lot of awesome info. I love talking to people who are enthusiastic about the smaller conferences. Really fun conversation, and hopefully things go well for you in week 2. Good luck.
Yeah, Jim, thanks for having me on. Ed, like always, great working with you. And look forward to talking with both of you going forward. Feel free to reach out anytime at Drew Martin Bets on Twitter. And guys, best of luck with your bets.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Drew.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Drew Martin for swinging by and talking about college football, getting us set for week number 2. And Ed, I was stoked that Drew wanted to keep going, to keep tossing out more bets. Drew does this professionally, but he's just giving out his picks for free. I love it. That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Drew Martin's a good guy, and I recommend you guys all follow him and get his insights on Twitter.
Yep, at Drew Martin Bets. Great Twitter follow, and his work is over at SportsMemo.com and Sportsbook Review. Within there, we did talk about OddsFire, and Ed and I always preach searching for the best value when betting on games. You want to shop for the best line. Well, look no further than the new odds comparison our engineers have developed over at numberfire.com. OddsFire is the premier odds comparison experience across major bookmakers in the regulated U.S. market. Compare odds, quickly identify the best value, and even examine first-party FanDuel data all in one place. Never settle, always get the best odds. Check out the experience for free now on NumberFire or at oddsfire.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's dive in now to covering the future. We're recording this on Wednesday, which means the NFL opener for the 100th season is tomorrow. We get Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur against Mitchell Trubisky and Matt Nagy. Ed, looking at this game, as we are, again, recording this on Wednesday, what do you see between the two sides here as the Packers head down to Chicago?
Yeah, I think in week 1 of the NFL, you're just taking your NFL research from the preseason and applying it to what you think these lines are to see if there's value against lines. I've talked about Green Bay before. I think the biggest factor is that Aaron Rodgers is going to be healthy this year. That has not been the case over the last 2 years, and I think that means a lot more than potential drama between, how he's going to work out with his new coach and Matt LaFleur. I'm also high on the defense. They have a lot of high draft picks heading into their second or third year in the secondary. Guys like Kevin King and Jair Alexander and Josh Jackson. If those guys can take a leap, that is going to be really good for that defense. And they also beefed up the pass rush, signing guys like Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. So I think they're going to be better on that side of the ball. I would lean towards over 9.5 wins. I probably wouldn't bet it just because it's the wrong way. But I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic about the Packers. But let's talk about Chicago. I think this has been a team that they were very good last year, but there's all kinds of warning signs about why they're going to regress this year. And most of them are on the defensive side of the ball. They led the league in interceptions. They had 27 picks, and that was 6 more than the next highest team in the NFL. And it's just a rate that you just can't continue. So unlikely to get that number of picks again. It's going to tend to regress to the mean, and that was a big part of why their defense was so good last year. They were also particularly healthy. Football Outsiders tracks games lost due to injury, and they were 4th best in the NFL. And they lose key pieces of the defense in the secondary, and then they're also installing a new system. Vic Fangio went over to Denver as the head coach, and Chuck Pagano is in as the new defensive coordinator. So all reasons to think that they can't be as good as they were on defense last year. Now, that doesn't mean that they regress to league average by any means. I think they're still going to be a very good unit, but you just can't expect them to be that good. And if they can't be that good, they're not going to be able to carry this team like they did last year, because I still think there's a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball. Last year, they were 13th when I look at success rate adjusted for strength of schedule, which is good, but not a type of offense that can carry a team to a Super Bowl by any means. Questions at the quarterback position. Mitchell Trubisky was good last year. He was not good as a rookie. He only completed about 59% of his passes. Was much better last year, completed about 67% of his passes, and he looked great at times, especially on a Monday night game at Seattle. But I still think there are questions about what he needs to get better, because there's going to be some regression on the defensive side of the ball. So I have my doubts about Chicago. When I do my numbers, I take market win totals and I back out the rating for these teams. That's consistent with, the fact the Packers are expected to win 9.5 games. The Bears are expected to win 9.5 games. And then I can make a number for week 1 based on these market win totals. My number comes out to 2. So expects Chicago at home to win by 2. I think there's value Green Bay +3 here. I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up at 2.5 by the time we kick off Thursday night.
Interesting. And you were talking about adjusted games lost, and you go to Football Outsiders and look at that, and not only did Green Bay add guys in free agency, and not only did they add guys in the draft, both last year and this year, defensively, but they also ranked 30th in adjusted games lost on defense due to injury. They were super banged up there, and now those guys can come back. That's a pretty big addition for this team, not to mention the fact that Aaron Rodgers was also hurt last year. Despite not missing games, he was hurt, and you could tell that throughout the entire season. So I am personally on Green Bay as a team, which is why and I'm skeptical of the Bears. I am not fully sold on Mitchell Trubisky, which is a slight understatement given, my more private thoughts about Mitchell as a quarterback. But I think that
he was good times last year.
He was good at home, which worries me about this game. It's weird how bad he was on the road. And my guess is that he'll regress in the negative sense at home and regress in the positive sense on the road. But at the end of the day, I would not expect another step forward here. So it was very weird. A weird year for Trubisky. But given all the additions to Green Bay, I would also be in on them +3 for Thursday's game. I want to talk college football for this week. And I think that this can kind of play along with what we discussed before, how people sometimes overreact to what they see in week 1. And Miami in week 1 lost in a weird fashion. They were on the road in a standalone game, but they lost to the 8th-ranked team in Florida, and UNC beat South Carolina at home. And South Carolina is a good team. So that was a good win for UNC in their first game with Mac Brown back. Miami did benefit from some fumble luck in that game, and Florida had some really bad penalties to keep Miami in that game. So Miami very easily could have lost by more than they did. But they also had 14 penalties for 118 yards themselves. Now they're rested. They had a bye week last week, and UNC just played in an emotional victory over South Carolina. If you look at Bill Connolly's SP Plus ratings right now, Miami is ranked 21st in the nation. Entering week 2, UNC is 50th. And NumberFire, looking at this game, projects Miami to win 31.43 to 21.88. That's projected final score. So, a 9.5 point spread or so. But this game is actually Miami -4 against UNC right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. It actually opened at Miami -6 and is now Miami -4. I would not be shocked if that number were to bounce back before we get to Saturday night as people adjust, maybe realize that Miami's coming off a bye week and stuff like that. But I think that based on last week, we may be just a bit too high on UNC off of one big game while underrating Miami after I thought was a good performance against Florida and coming off a bye week too. If you look at OddsFire right now, 77% of the bets and 81% of the money are on Miami against the spread. So I think that snagging that at -4 before it bounces back would be the way to go. It could continue to shift towards UNC, in which case maybe we're in the same spot we were talking about with Drew before where, you are kind of buying against the market, swimming upstream sometimes. But I still think that I do like Miami -4 here. Now, Ed, I went to the Power Rank to check this before we recorded, and UNC and Miami are almost identical in your power rankings, and UNC is at home. So am I dumb to like Miami -4? What are your thoughts on that game?
Well, I think Miami's interesting. We talked about Jaron Williams, the quarterback, and how accurate he was, even on balls that weren't complete. Always giving his receivers a chance, putting balls in places that you'd expect an accurate quarterback. And we know the defense can play. And I agree with everything you said about the performance against Florida. A very good team, kind of very sloppy opening game. You expect better from the defense. So, I'm looking at my member numbers here. I have Miami by about 2.
Yeah.
I think there's upside to that team. So I don't know if I would necessarily trust that. I think especially where the market's at now, I would stay away from this game.
Yeah.
But I like your arguments, and I think especially with kind of the emotional high of North Carolina, coming off a pretty emotional win in Mac Brown's first game, we'll see how that affects them.
I don't know how much it's worth in the line, Mac Brown's dancing skills. Like, is that worth 6 points? Maybe. I don't know. That could just totally blow my argument out of the water because Mac Brown kind of got some moves. Like, I don't want to go too outrageous here, but he could boogie a little bit. So maybe that's worth something. Yeah. But I do like Miami -4 against UNC. We'll be back with you on Friday to preview week 1 of the 2019 NFL season. Should be a lot of fun talking with Donnie Rightside. Make sure you subscribe to the Covering the Spread podcast feed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play Store, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts, you can subscribe and get that episode right as it is posted. Ed, I'll talk to you again on Friday. Anything big for you over at the Power Rank? I know that your preview series is done, so congratulations on that. Anything else coming up before Friday?
There's always the email newsletters that I send out on Thursday. So I give a sample of I give a sample of predictions I usually save for paying members of the site, such as the one I just gave you about Miami, North Carolina. These are my best numbers that have the most predictors in them. You can get a sample by signing up for my free newsletter at thepowerrank.com.
All right, you can find that again at thepowerrank.com, as Ed said, and follow Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank. I am at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald. He is our producer. Thanks to Cal for keeping us on the air and chopping up all these videos for the at FanDuel Twitter account. Big thank you to Drew Martin for swinging by and spreading all of his awesome knowledge about college football for week 2. Follow him on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. And of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in and checking out this episode of Covering the Spread. Back at you Friday to talk a little NFL. Good luck with your college football bets this week, and we'll talk to you again soon. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.